Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Previously, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Maufarin Bariro with name J1E020015, and here I'd like to give you a review about the journal article titled Semantic Relation Cause Interference in Spoken Language Comprehension when using repeated definite references, not pronouns. And this journal article is created by some authors. There are Sarah A. Peters, and then Timothy Webouti, and the last is Amit Almore. Well, before we start the journal article, I'd like to give you a simple introduction of this journal article itself. So, the choice and processing of referential expressions depends on the reference status within the discourse, such that pronouns are generally preferred over full repetitive references when the referent is salient. And also, coherent discourse can be established via different forms of repeated reference to the same referent, such as repeated names. For example, repeated names, there are Jane, or maybe Jack, John, and then Bella, and others. And then definite descriptions, for the example, the girl, and then the kid, the boy, and others. And also the last is pronouns. Pronouns, as we know, there are she, her, his, him, and etc. And the form used for repeated references is generally related to the discourse status of the referent. And for example, full definite descriptions are often used to introduce references that were not previously mentioned, or to refer to references that were previously mentioned but are not currently salient in the discourse. And in contrast, pronouns are often and naturally used to refer to previously mentioned references that are salient in the context of the discourse itself. And one of the clearest empirical demonstration of the relationship between referential form and reference discourse status is the repeated name penalty, or we call this RNP. And we jump to the purpose of the research itself. The goals of this study were to investigate the RNP, or the repeated name penalty, in spoken language comprehension. And it's examine the time course of reference processing in spoken language comprehension, and better understand the underlying memory processes and their influences. And also there are some research methodology. So the authors itself conducted 2 experiments for the research. So the first experiment is aimed to provide a more general test of activation of semantic information during the reference processing and the RNP. And the second experiment to test whether the processing of repeated reference is affected by the strength of the semantic relation between the referent and the information associated with it earlier in the discourse. And then experiment 1, it examined whether an effect analogous to the RMP can be observed in spoken language comprehension using the visual word paradigm, or we call this VWP. And at the same time, examine the time course and also the nature of the underlying memory process in order to test the theories presented itself. And the visual displays used in the experiments were borrowed from Yi and Sedify in 2006 and contained items that were semantically related to one another within the displays. And then for the experiment ones, for the participant itself, 49 undergrad students recruited from the University of South Carolina Psychology Department's participant pool. They are participated in this experiment for course credit. And then for the material of this experiment itself, as shown in figure 1 and also the table 1a, later I will show the data, and then its item consisted of the pictorial display showing 4 objects arranged in the corners of a 3x3 grid and a corresponding 3-sentence discourse. And also the procedure of this experiment itself began with 4 practice trials, before which the experimenter calibrated the eye tracker using a 9-point calibration procedure. Here are the data of the experiment itself. And in this slide, this is the figure 1, and the next slide is the table 1. So there are the data, and also we jump to the experiment 2. For the experiment 2 itself, the participants are the same with the experiment 1, which is the 14 undergrad students that recruited from the University of South Carolina Psychology departments. And also the material itself, similarly with the experiment 1, which is the pictorial displays used in experiment 2 were similar to those used in experiment 1. And also for the procedure of this experiment itself, the procedure and also the tasks for this experiment were similar to the experiment 1. And the last we finally come to the result of the experiments. So in spoken language comprehension, this preference is reflected in delayed fixations to reference mentioned after repeated definite references compared with after pronouns. And repeated references are processed differently than the new references. And then the third result is long-term semantic memory representation affect the processing of pronouns and repeated names differently. And overall, these results support the role of semantic discourse representation in referential processing and reveal important details about how pronouns and full repeated references are processed in the context of this representation. And the results suggest the need for modification to current theoretical accounts of reference processing, such as discourse prominence theory and also the informational load hypothesis. So that's all for the review of this journal. And if you want to read further about this journal, you can visit the link that I provide in the description box. Right? Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.